Whether it's goals you're looking for, or people freaking out over video replay refereeing, we've had plenty to keep us sports fans occupied. On this latest episode, we've got another jam-packed show just for you, the sports fan. We have an interview from a star of Goalball UK, we have a major U-turn from a sportswear giant, and we also have Rugby World Cup preparations to chat about. Welcome to SportSpiel. Yes, listeners, happy Sunday. We hope everyone is enjoying the summer weather, in that it's constantly tipping it down all across the country. I'm here in the cosy confines of King's Place, as is Mr. Will Moulton. How is life at the moment?
Well, life is currently very sunny. I don't know what you're talking about with all the rain. It's lovely weather outside.
I say that as someone who's recently been away on holiday to Scotland, where it rained every single day.
As is the normal case up in Scotland.
Yes, exactly. But you've just arrived fresh off the back of reporting on England hockey women this morning.
I have.
Against Ireland.
I have, and more to come on that later. England's men have also been in action and will be in action in about 2.5 hours, so I have to run away as soon as we've finished recording this.
It's commitment to the cause. Anyway, on today's episode, this is what we have for you. First up, we have an interview with Goalball UK's Sarah Leiter. In the second part, we've got the news roundup as always, followed by our discussion section where we look at England Rugby's World Cup squad and their prospects. We've then got Ask Alasdair, an always enjoyable section on this podcast. All that's to come, but first, it's feature interview time. Sarah Leiter is one of the key members of Great Britain's goalball team, but not only that, she is also a junior doctor after graduating from Cambridge University. She's a Woman of the Future award winner, a joint winner with friend of the show Alex Pask, by the way, but she's also a huge inspiration. In this interview, we chat about overcoming her visual impairment to becoming a top-class athlete and also her journey to becoming a doctor. We've also got discussion about the power of goalball, with the team aiming to qualify for Tokyo 2020, as well as the importance of having women in sports showcased across the media. Welcome back, listeners, to another of our feature interviews, and this time we have an athlete with a very hectic schedule at the moment. Not only is she a junior doctor, but she's also a key part of the Great Britain goalball team, with hopes of getting to the Tokyo Paralympics next summer. It's a very warm welcome to Sarah Leiter. Welcome to the show, Sarah. How are things at the moment?
Yeah, very well. I'm enjoying a nice, relaxed day. Unusual in my busy schedule.
Exactly, yeah, because we were just talking before we started recording that it's actually a weekend off for you, which I'm sure you use very wisely to catch up on some much-needed rest.
Indeed.
So, goalball, it's a sport that we haven't really touched on before on the podcast, and it's a sport specifically for visually impaired athletes as well. I'll come to the benefits of the sport and how you got into it later on, but can I first maybe start or touch on life growing up? Because I think you're born with albinism and you only have 10% normal vision. And I think particularly when I look through some comments on goalball videos, for example, on YouTube, and a lot of people can take their vision for granted when they have it. So how has your condition sort of shaped your life, really?
Yeah, so as you said, I was born with albinism. I've got about 10% of vision in both eyes. And to be honest, growing up, I have an amazing family, and it was not really a problem. It was not an issue. It wasn't discussed. I just kind of got on with life. My big brother learned how to ride a bike. Therefore, I would learn how to ride a bike. They'd obviously, keep an extra eye on me. But actually, until I reached school, I didn't really know any different. And obviously, with school comes challenges. So even sitting in the very front row, I can't read the board. So, by the age of 6, I had to learn how to use a telescope and magnifiers. And it was quite early on, actually, but I learned how to touch type, use special software on my computer, and just got through school like that. I was always quite a geeky kid, let's be honest. And it was really my own albinism that made me think, oh, I really want to be a doctor because that's really cool. And again, I didn't really stop to pause and think, if you're visually impaired, being a doctor would be a challenge, and just got on with it. Sports growing up, as I say, I was always included in everything. I went cycling, I went skiing, I did whatever everyone else did in the family. But school PE was not great. I really struggled. As soon as there was a ball involved, I just more likely to get hit by the ball than to manage to catch it. And I really didn't like it because I would try hard, but I just couldn't succeed. And I was that last kid to be picked just because there was no way for me to be able to participate in the same way. My school locally, there was really no opportunities for doing visually impaired sports. So, never knew any of that through school. Didn't know what goalball was.
Yeah, because from the family perspective side of things, it sounds like it helped and had maybe instilled into you this mentality of just getting on with it because that is how they treated it.
Absolutely. And it was always really positive. It was always let's find a way around this. When we go skiing, of course, one of my parents would be in front of me, right? Therefore I'd know who to follow. But it was always, let's find small adaptations and just get on with life.
From the sporting side of things in school and PE and things like that, obviously it sounds like a bit of a struggle really trying to find a sport that you could do. But were you still sort of sporty at heart? Was it still something you wanted to do and you weren't put off by those problems that you had during school PE?
I wasn't a particularly sporty kid, but nor would I be the one sort of sitting around. So, we had an after-school climbing club, and actually there with a rope, or even bouldering, actually, visual impairment doesn't stop you that much. So I would do that, and I would do swimming. So I would sort of be active, but not competitive. Just enjoying it. And I always liked being outside. So, I'd go sailing in the summer, as much as I could do outdoor stuff, but it was never competitive. It was always just for leisure.
So on to goalball then. When does your introduction to the sport come about, and what was it about it that got you hooked?
Yeah, so I went with my parents to watch some of the London 2012 Olympic Games, just for fun, kind of, because we had the opportunity, and it was amazing, and I totally loved it. And that made me think, okay, you've been doing various things casually while at uni. I was just about to start my PhD, and I thought I'll try something else. I was thinking, how can I do more sports? Can I join a team or something at Cambridge? And then the Paralympics obviously came a month later, and I found out about goalball, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of fun. I'll give that a go. And luckily there was a local team, not too far away. So I went along one Sunday, and it was a really nice crowd, actually. Well, crowd is a bit an overstatement. It's a really nice small group of people. And it was really, what got me hooked initially was the social side. Mm-hmm. We would train on a Friday night and then go to the bar afterwards. That was what we did. And it made really, it was my first opportunity really as an adult to interact with other visually impaired people. But also we had a couple of teenagers, so I could, you could pass on experience and go, actually, it's not that bad. You can have a job, you can get on with life. So I think it was the social side which attracted me. And then our club, to be honest, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were a very new club. We didn't really know the rules. It was a fun time to be involved. But then that was September time. And in December, I went to my first tournament, which actually happened in Cambridge. And our team became 11th out of 12th. I didn't particularly care. We'd had fun. We'd split court time equally. But then I got an email a couple of months later sort of going, do you want to attend this talent ID day in Birmingham? And I laughed a bit to myself and said, you know what, why not? I've got nothing else to do that week and I'll go. And then a week later, they were like, yeah, do you want to come and train in Hereford with the GB women's team? And I was like, wait, what? What just happened to my life? And I was like, again, I was like, oh yeah, you know what, I'll go along. Got nothing else to do. And just went, and then suddenly was on a plane to Poland another 10 days later, and it was it started from there, and then I got really hooked by the sporting side of it. So say the social side was what drew me in, but then once I started seeing the sport at a higher level, it became exciting with regards to, it's a really tactical game. There's lots going on. You have to be powerful, you have to be agile, but you can also, it's about outsmarting your opposition as well. And that's probably what kept me in the sport, even though the social side got me into it.
So it's almost like, because I suppose a lot of people who've experienced sport at university, for example, can relate to the social side of it, because it can give you a lot. But is the sporting side of it now is maybe more what's driven you to it? Because I don't know if you hadn't had that, would you have stayed in goalball as you have now?
Oh, if it hadn't been as exciting, no, I don't think I would have. It's a great team, but it's a fantastic sport. It's a lot of fun to play. It's exhausting. You come off the pitch dripping, and that feels good. And the competitive nature as well. I've always been competitive. I just never was able to live it in sport. But, you can be really competitive and you can win games, and it's super exciting. I just love it.
Yeah, and you're also hearing that story. There's quite a few guests we've had on now who got into their sports by watching it at London 2012 in one way or another. Off the top of my head, Jack Hodgson from British Judo is one such example. How important were those games to you then? And I suppose to a lot of people in getting them into sport in the first place?
I think for me, the importance lay with regards to changing the stigma of disabled sport. There was me, I was a medical student, living my own life. My visual impairment didn't really matter. I sort of had, I did things differently, and, I used my aids, but on the other hand, I sort of didn't really engage with it very much. And in particular, in terms of sports, I'd always seen disabled sport with a sort of negative connotation. Like, it's going to be boring. It's going to be, it's like, I feel so sorry for disabled people. Let's give them an opportunity too. And actually it was, and that is, I think, for me, what London really changed. It was, no, this is not, we don't take pity on the people because they've got a disability. It's still a really competitive environment. It's a really professional environment. And you watch the people at the top of their sport, and they're working just as hard. They might be working slightly differently, but they're working just as hard to achieve. And I think that was the thing that made it change for me. And it was then actually saying, you know what, it's okay. I can play a disabled sport. I can still be a really capable person in life, but playing a disabled sport actually might suit me better rather than being a negative.
Yeah, I would go along with that. I think a lot of perceptions were changed at that time or in that summer. Is there any way that you've changed from you first starting out to where you are now?
Oh God, physically a lot. That's I think a good starting point. I think I've gained a lot from the sport in terms of accepting, or talking more openly about my disability. Being around other young visually impaired people. I think that's definitely something. I love the traveling, but sort of some of the, if you're playing sports at high level, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. There's a lot of determination. And I think actually that work ethic for me works really well. So I can work really, really hard in my sport over the weekend. And then Monday morning I'm back in work and I have to work really, really hard. But actually, because you're still working hard, but you're doing something different. And I find that sort of kind of that skill really translates, whether we're talking about goalball or whether you're talking about academic or medical career kind of things.
Exactly. They're skills you can apply in various different parts of your life.
Absolutely.
Has it been easy? Because you mentioned maybe talking more openly about your condition and the sport, and a lot of people in your position, particularly if they're younger, can maybe look up to you now as well. Has being that role model been a strange thing to get to grips with?
At times, because I think in my head I never saw myself as an athlete, in particular growing up. So I would, being an academic role model was one thing, but then being a role model in terms of being an athlete, I'd always, as a child, you watch people on television, you go like, oh my God. And it's really funny becoming that person to other young people. Yeah, it's an interesting experience. It wasn't part of my life plan.
Yeah, because it's like it's just suddenly you hopped on the roller coaster really, and have been going on it for quite a few years now.
Yeah.
Coming on to then the other part of your life that I mentioned at the start, and that's the medicine side of things and becoming a junior doctor. Again, you mentioned at the start that sort of becoming a doctor was down to the nerdy side of you growing up.
Yeah.
But I mean, how hard has it been? Because it's a very tough profession to get into, but it must also be one of the most rewarding things that you can get involved with in your life as well.
It is, and I totally love it. It's hard work, and you come home and you're tired, but I don't regret it ever. Even when you've got a really bad day, I think there's little interactions in the day which just make you feel like you're doing something really worthwhile, and the hard work just pays off.
Because I imagine speaking to some of my friends who are doctors, there's the really, really tough days where you kind of have to just get through every hour or every minute at a time, but then there's the rewarding days as well. So that must help you applying yourself mentally in the sports side of things as well.
Absolutely. I find really, I think I alluded to it earlier, I find there is something really balancing about sports and medicine. So I can have a really, really rough day in the hospital, and some days are really bad, but then you go to the gym and you hit a PB, and suddenly your day's not as bad as it was a minute ago. Or on the other hand, whatever, you've played a tournament all weekend, and instead of on Monday either commiserating that you've just lost or being ecstatic but just exhausted, you go back to work. And I think for me, I find it really good as a balance, sort of to have those two parts to my life that don't really overlap, unless I get injured or somebody else gets injured, which I avoid, obviously.
Is it easy to maintain that balance and try not to get lost in one side or the other?
I think it naturally, the balance is almost enforced on you, because there are times when I'm at work, there are times when I'm in the gym. They don't, or at a competition, they don't overlap. I made a rule, even when I was still in medical school, I would not take revision to GB training. I would never take my work. And actually, that really helped, and because it separates out the two things. But also, I think because if you're working really hard and then you've had a couple of days in inverted commas off while you're playing sport, mentally you feel really sort of reinvigorated on Monday morning, even if you're physically exhausted.
Looking ahead then, specifically to the Tokyo Paralympics, and there is a chance for GB to bag a spot via the European Championships, which is later this year. Is that almost where your sole focus is, or the team's sole focus is at the moment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we ranked 11th in the world, and we needed to become 10th in the cycle running up to Rio. So we were the official reserve going into Rio, and that was painful. And I think so. All those of us who've been through one cycle without qualification, I think we're really determined now that this time round we want to be there. And we've done really well recently, and actually we can qualify. So I think all the effort and all the focus is going into that process now.
Yeah, because you think back to the 11th place and missing by such a small margin. Has that almost fueled you and the rest of the team?
Yeah, I think those of us, obviously squads change. It's 4 years ago now. But those of us who were around then, for us, it's absolutely, I don't want to be sitting there again watching it on the television. I want to be there.
Is there anything that's changed then in terms of preparation now compared to preparation 4 years ago, whether it's a tactic side of things? And we've got the funding now, of course, from the Aspiration Fund this time around.
Absolutely. I think that is the big thing. 4 years ago, we were going to go to the Paralympic qualifiers in Seoul in South Korea. And probably about a month beforehand, me and two of the other girls were standing in King's Cross Station with buckets collecting money, because actually we didn't even have the money to go to the tournament at this point. And I think we went to 2 tournaments in the run up to that, and maybe had 2 training camps. I think the focus was, or couldn't be, on training and on the sporting side, because we knew we didn't even have the money to go. So having funding has made a huge difference, because our whole head can simply be focused on the game, the training side of things. We just don't have to worry about the finances right now, and we can just really focus on the training, both individually as well as a team, and I think that's made a huge impact.
Yeah, exactly, and it's familiar stories we hear from a number of different sports, whether they're direct recipients of UK sport funding, or whether it's from the Aspiration Fund that we talked about when the news first came about that they were actually creating that fund as well. Can you allow yourself to get ahead of things and start dreaming about going out to Tokyo, or is it very much a case of taking it one tournament or one stage at a time?
I think for me, dreaming doesn't help me focus, and that's very much an individual thing, I'd say. So for me, it is very much like, right now I know the task is to qualify. Once we've qualified, I can think about Tokyo. But in my head right now, the task is qualification. And I think for other people, the way they motivate themselves might be through then, dreaming about what it's going to be like. For me personally, that's not so much the case. So it's much more about, okay, what do we need to do right now? How highly do we need to rank at the Europeans? What do we need to do here? What do I need to do at home in order to, be the best prepared I can be for the team to then qualify?
Exactly. So in terms of your preparation schedule, what kind of things are you going to be getting up to up until the championships?
Yeah, so we've got one more international tournament at the beginning of September. So we fly out at the beginning of October. We go to Spain at the beginning of September. We've got a domestic competition, I want to say, at the middle of September. We've got a GB training in September. We've got another 3-day camp in August. So I'm on average about every other weekend, except I think in September we're doing 3 in a row. But it's how it works out.
Exactly, yeah. And I imagine there must be plenty of scope for people to come along and watch those as well domestically and get a taste of it.
Yeah. No, we always welcome spectators. You can always come along to any tournaments. I think the season kicks off. I actually think our first tournament is in Peterborough. So, just if people want to have a look, just go into the Goalball UK website and find out. There's sort of different levels of tournaments, from elite level, but all the way down to novice level for people who are first getting involved in the sport.
Exactly. Final topic that I'll sort of mention and discuss about is the sports women's side of things, because obviously it's a big passion of ours on the podcast. We like to promote women's sport wherever we can, and of course you in 2017 were a Women of the Future Awards winner, jointly with Alex Pask, who of course we know very well on this podcast because we're partners with the Mintridge Foundation. But in terms of the sportswomen's side of it and the promotion, how vital is it from your perspective that we try and showcase women's sport wherever we can, whether it's social media, TV, anywhere in the media really, at this moment in time?
I think, to be honest, that is the essential thing right now. We train just as hard as our male counterparts, and so often in the media we do not get the same coverage. And I think there's been recently, it has improved. For example, the Women's World Cup got a lot more coverage than any previous Women's World Cup, at least that I can remember. And so I think the attitude is changing, but I think it's really important to consciously make this effort, because it's very simply phrased, but just because it's women doing a sport doesn't mean it's any less exciting, it's any less hard work for the individuals, it's any, there's any less passion going into it. Actually, technically it might look a little bit different, speeds might be a little bit different, but the competition itself is still super exciting. And I think that's what needs to come across to the general public as well.
sport is sport, as we've always said. From the goalball side of things as well, because there seems to be a real recognition on GB's part to give equal attention to both the men's side and the women's side as well. But is that representative across all other countries?
Well, I think it's really variable, and I think it really depends actually on who does well, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So the Turkish women are absolutely incredible. Hat off to them. They work very hard, but they're very good. And they do get a lot of coverage in their own right. The Turkish men's squad is not as good, and they don't. And actually, I think that is, in that case, a very fair reflection of where they stand within the sport. So I think it's a little bit variable between different countries. But in a lot of cases, I think in general, there is a recognition, at least, sort of from what an outsider can perceive of another country,
mm-hmm.
that, if the women's side is good, they do get recognition for that.
Exactly. We've talked about the media side of things, but is there anything else you feel we should be focusing on to try and help promote the women's side of sport, or try and get more people involved in sport, or more girls involved in sport?
I think one thing that I love about Goalball is that we play actually mixed gender, except for at international level. So within the UK, we play mixed gender. What that means is that when people are coming into the sport as teenagers, for example, or even as young adults, they can enter at their own level. But if there isn't enough women to make their own women's team, it doesn't matter, because they can just join with some of the men. In my club, I'm better than some of the men, but we still play together. It doesn't really matter. I'm also worse than some of the men, but it's kind of gender is a secondary viewpoint. At first, it's like you look at the player level and as an individual. And, if somebody has an additional disability, that might impact on what level they play at. But actually, gender is not as relevant. And for me, I think that is something that I think other sports could learn from, especially in with the younger groups. In football, if you've got 8-year-old girl playing or an 8-year-old boy, at that point, they're probably a similar size. Their physical development is not very different. I think there could be a lot more sports where things could join up. I grew up in Germany, where exactly this is the case. Girls and boys play together in football until the age of 12, usually. And I think it just means that there's a natural interaction, but also there's not as much pressure to have enough women to field the team. Because in team sports, sometimes it can be the limiting factor of, do you actually have enough people? And this way, even if there's one woman coming into a team, it doesn't matter. They can immediately get involved and play in tournaments, because gender is not a criterion which matters. Internationally, it has to, and that's a separate discussion altogether. I think domestically, when it gets about getting people involved, playing together creates really big value.
Yeah, and I think the potential off the back of that could be huge as well if more sports followed that line. My final question then, as I always give to athletes on this podcast, is an opportunity to almost plug your own sport, really, to anyone who's listening who may be thinking about getting involved themselves, or who may be thinking about coming along to spectate or come to an event. So why should we all love goalball as much as you love goalball?
I think the first really important thing is to say, even if you're fully sighted, you can play domestically. So we've got fully sighted people playing, so don't let yourself be put off by being able to see, I guess. Love goalball. I think it's a fast-paced sport. It's an exciting sport. You meet new people. You gain new skills. How often do you listen to a ball and really use your hearing properly rather than relying on other skills? It's very tactical. If you want to be sneaky, you can be. If you want to just go out and be really powerful, that's also legitimate. So I think it's just a sport which has an amazing community, but allows every person to develop a little bit of their own style and their own way of doing things.
Perfectly said. And with that, I'll wrap up this feature interview. And again, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, Sarah. Wish you all the very best in terms of the European Championships, and hopefully some Tokyo qualification will come along off the back of that as well. And I think I speak on behalf of all the listeners in saying there's a lot of positive messages there and some important messages there, particularly for getting younger girls and promoting women's sport even further later down the line. So very good luck, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to SportSpiel, available on Audio Boom, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you to Sarah for taking some time out to chat to us. As ever on the podcast, we hope everyone enjoyed that listen. Interestingly as well, 9% of visually impaired people in this country participate in sport, which I hope something like that interview can maybe help turn the tide on a statistic like that. Moving on now to our next section, the first in part 2 of this episode, and it is the always popular news roundup, where myself and Will go through some of the most important news headlines from the last couple of weeks. Some of them you may have seen, but some of them may have gone under the radar, but we've picked them out because we feel they're important to be talked about and shared. It's a quick fire round. We have the 2-minute timer at the ready, rather, with the duck timer. And thank you. Would you like to take us away with your first news story of the last couple of weeks?
Go on then. And it's a story that's actually developing as we record at the moment, and that is the news that cricket has seen its first ever concussion substitution. Regular listeners will know how much I love cricket, and obviously with the Ashes going on at the moment, I'm all over that. And it's been a struggle for England to get Steve Smith out, but they have found a way, and that is to hit him on the head.
I hope not deliberately.
No, it wasn't deliberate. It was a good fiery spell of bowling from Jofra Archer and slightly bad technique from Smith. He was hit on the back of the head, sort of around the cheek, jaw, neck area, so it was a really nasty blow. It was fantastic to see him get up and walk off the pitch. He had concussion assessment initially, came back out to bat, passed all the tests, but got out, and then had his symptoms got worse overnight. He said he woke up groggy this morning, and Cricket Australia have decided to take him out of the rest of this test match, which is the right move. And with the addition of the new ICC World Test Championship, which started with this Ashes series, we've seen a few changes, such as names and numbers on the backs of shirts, and this is a new thing as well, concussion substitution. And I think that's a really good move, because concussion is such a serious injury, it's so debilitating. So to be able to take someone out of a game situation and bring a substitute in to replace them is something I think that really it stops the disadvantage of an injury. Obviously, we saw in the first test, James Anderson pulled up injured, wasn't allowed to bowl, but because it was a calf injury, it's not very serious. This is a concussion substitution has come in to save lives and to prolong lives and to stop brain damage, to stop people playing on through brain damage. So I think it's a great move, and hopefully we don't see too many more of these, but first and foremost, we hope Steve Smith is okay. And I think it just keeps the contest alive, really, bringing in Marcus Labuschagne for the last day. It could be very interesting to see what happens.
An important move, and we've talked about concussion a lot on this show while we've been doing it. You've had your own experiences with it, but I suppose the key example when we've had Shona McAllen on, she's been on a couple of times, and we need an example of just how bad and serious concussion can be. She's the perfect example of it. She's only just back playing after how many months in total was it? Like 16?
17 months, 17. But not all of those with concussion. She has subsequently had other injuries as well. But I think that the most important thing here was the recognition of the delayed symptoms. He initially passed the checks and came back out to bat, but as the more he batted, the more you could see something wasn't right. And then he said he woke up feeling quite bad this morning as well, and Australia have just kept monitoring him, which is the right thing to do. And it's something that we need to be more aware of, is that concussion symptoms don't emerge straight away. They can be very delayed. So hopefully, though, for him it's not too serious and he'll be back. Well, I say hopefully he'll be back, but sort of he's so good you don't want him to come back in a way.
Understandable. So my first story is the news that female Nike-sponsored athletes will no longer be penalised for having a child. 6-time Olympic gold medalist Alison Felix shared the news after Nike changed its contracts for female athletes. In a letter shared by Felix on social media, the sportswear giant says it will not apply any performance-related reduction for 18 months if an athlete becomes pregnant. Felix herself has been one of the big campaigners for this change. Her daughter was born prematurely back in November, and in May, she said Nike wanted to pay her 70% less after she became a mother. Writing in the New York Times back then, Felix said, "I asked Nike to contractually guarantee that I wouldn't be punished if I didn't perform at my best in the months surrounding childbirth. I wanted to set a new standard. If I, one of Nike's most widely marketed athletes, couldn't secure these protections, who could?" Nike declined. So Felix returned to racing in July, and after that she decided that she wasn't going to renew her contract with Nike, and she's now joined Athleta instead. Huge change, big U-turn really from their original stance. I think it's a key example of how public pressure and athlete pressure can really change the policy at a company as huge as Nike. And as Felix said in her post on social media, our voices have power. But I think I put it out in the tweet on our account as well. It's something that needed to be done, and it was a shame it took as long and took as many voices as it did to change that policy.
Yeah, and it's also something we don't necessarily hear that much of in sport, because it seems to be stereotypical that a female athlete can only have children after her career is finished. But there are more and more athletes now. You think of Joe Pavey, Jodie Kenny in hockey, Jess Ennis-Hill, who go away, have a baby. Like one of the toughest things the body can go through, and then to come back and win in gold medals, which I think is so inspirational. And it's becoming more and more of a thing now. And I think women should have the options, be able to take a break from sport, but still be on the same level of pay or a similar level of pay in the way they would be in a normal workplace. So it's come far too late from Nike. This should have been a thing. We shouldn't even be having this argument. This should have just been a standard thing for women anyway, but better late than never. And hopefully a lot of female athletes will benefit from this and have a greater choice over how sort of they control their life and their work balance as well.
I look at, say, Siobhan Chamberlain at the moment, who the Manchester United goalkeeper, who's taken some time out now to have a child, and just still part of the club throughout that as well. So I think gradually we're getting there into this is now the commonplace of thinking, whereas perhaps we weren't there in the past.
Yeah, hopefully. On to my next story, and it's been a quiet couple of weeks for Formula One because there has been no racing. The sport is on its summer break. Well, it's been quiet on the track. Off the track, it's been very busy. Silly season has started. Rumours about who's going to be driving where next season have certainly been dominating the Formula One headlines, but there's been a mid-season switch, which we don't see very often, between Red Bull and Scuderia Toro Rosso. So Pierre Gasly, promoted to Red Bull this season from Toro Rosso, has now been demoted back down to the team, having failed to really drive anywhere near the standard we know he can, and anywhere near the standard of his teammate Max Verstappen. So in his place has been promoted Alex Albon, who was at Toro Rosso, the half-British driver racing under the Thai flag. So great for Britain to have another top driver of our heritage racing for one of the best teams, and it'd be interesting to see how they do. But Red Bull are slightly short on options at the moment. Their driver program has sort of got a 2 or 3 year gap where there's no one really ready to come through just yet. There's a few youngsters coming through like Dan Tinkton, but they're not ready for Formula One. So it's just an interesting switch, and given the timing as well, mid-season, it feels a bit harsh on Gasly, especially as Christian Horner and Red Bull said a few weeks ago his seat was safe till the end of the year. To now have demoted him, giving Albon a sort of a 9-run shot at potentially taking that seat next year. It's just all a bit strange. I just given the fact that they said his seat was safe, to have then 3 weeks or 2 weeks later have removed him from that seat is a strange one. But yeah, hopefully from a British perspective, Albon excels in that role.
A metaphorical kick in the gonads, I think it's fair to say. Yeah,
a slightly unfair one as well, in my opinion.
But always an opportunity then for him to bounce back.
Yes, it's going to be difficult in that Toro Rosso car because it's such a performance deficit between that and the Red Bull, but we'll never know.
On to my next story, and it's former Wasps and England rugby star Christian Wade, who is making quite the impact stateside at the moment as he tries to make it in the NFL. Now, after we talked about him in the discussion episode, back on episode 30, that was in October time, and we mentioned how difficult it would be for him to actually make it in American football. But he's starting off rather well during pre-season for the Buffalo Bills. First, he scored an exceptional 65-yard touchdown against the Indianapolis Colts, and I urge anyone who hasn't seen that to watch it on the BBC Sport website or whichever video player of your choosing. And this weekend, he again caught the eye with a 45-yard dash against the Carolina Panthers. The Bills head coach, Sean McDermott, said Wade's break was, quote, awesome, as only an American would say. And it was another special moment for him and for this team. He obviously hasn't made it yet. He hasn't signed a contract yet, but I think he's maybe surprising a lot of us who doubted him by getting off to such a flyer, even though it is pre-season. Still a long way to go, obviously. But we were constantly debating the transferable skills between rugby and NFL. And also, I think one of the key bits is it's very obvious just how popular he is in that team as well, judging from what reporters are saying stateside about him. And that probably stands him in good stead as well.
He's doing very well, isn't he? Proving me wrong. But I don't think a lot of people who knew him over here ever doubted he'd excel, and I think he's repaying the faith everyone had in him. And given that all the debates surrounding England's selection for the upcoming Rugby World Cup, which we will talk about later, it's just interesting to see how quickly he has excelled in that game over there. And perhaps one or two people are thinking back over here that he should be doing that for us in Japan in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
But watch this space stateside.
Certainly. On to my final story, and we might as well keep it close to home and stick with my work. But the Euro Hockey Championships have begun. They began on Friday. We're now recording on the Sunday. England's men and women have both been in action. England's men played first and slightly underwhelmed us, I hope they don't mind me saying, with a 2-2 draw against Wales, the lowest ranked side in the competition. To be fair, Wales held their own, frustrated England and almost had the winner, only for James Gall to snatch a late equaliser. England's women then started this morning, as we recorded, with a 2-1 win against Ireland. 2 very good goals. The second, an absolute screamer from former guest Giselle Ansley, which I'm sure we'll be retweeting later. Honestly, I've never seen a flick that good from a woman, and most men as well I don't think would ever be able to produce what she did this morning. And it got a little bit tight towards the end. Ireland got a goal back, and Maddie Hinch was required to pull off a few impressive saves, but a good start to the tournament. And basically both teams, if either team wins the Euros, then their Great Britain counterparts qualify for Rio. If they don't, then Great Britain will have to play a 2-legged Olympic qualifier in late October or early November. Still yet to be decided. I don't see either team winning, but I can certainly see both teams meddling top 2, top 3. So decent start for the women. I think they'll be really happy with that. They've got Germany next. The men have got to play Belgium later today, which could go one of two ways. We could do a really good performance, or the Belgians could run away with it. But things are going upwards and not for both teams. And then with the Great Britain setup, it's an exciting time now building into Tokyo 2020.
Busy at work, I can tell.
It's also great to have another former guest, Shona McCallum, back as well. We've spoken to her at length about the issues she suffered, and it's been a long wait for her. And as someone who knows her fairly well, has shared most of that disappointment and upset with her. To actually see her back playing this morning was a really good feeling, and she played really well as well. It was like she had barely been away. So great for her to be back, and also great for the GB team to have a player of her calibre back as well.
Definitely. We'll echo that sentiment. My final story then, and I'm going to mention the inaugural Women's Tour of Scotland, partly because it started last weekend in Dundee while I was on holiday there, so I got to actually see the start in the bucketing rain, and they ended up calling off the first stage. So, successful. But, aside from that, the weather side of things, America's Leah Thomas claimed the inaugural title. After sprinting to victory in the third and final stage on the Sunday, the 30-year-old began that final stage to Edinburgh 7 seconds behind general classification leader Alison Jackson, and Thomas also claimed the Queen of the Sprints jersey. The tour itself was supposed to be a big moment for women's cycling in this country and in the world, because we've often talked about the lack of a really big women's tour. The men have the Vuelta, Tour de France, for example, and granted this is only 3 stages long, but definitely something to build on. I'll mention the weather again. It wasn't the best. The fact that the first stage had to be called off, and a large part of it was showcasing Scotland as a destination as well. It would have helped if you'd actually been able to see some of the scenery through the rain, which proved a little bit of a problem, but seeing the amount of people turn out on the start line, considering the conditions, tells me the appetite is there, and the amount of coverage it got tells me the appetite is there as well. So definitely something to build on. And it helped having someone like Katie Archibald, big name in cycling, being a part of it as well to drum up the interest in the first place.
You say about the coverage, but I think it could have been better personally, because I was struggling to find much about it from major outlets.
There's the thing, major outlets. It got a lot of coverage, say, on the BBC Sport Scotland site. Down here, probably not as much. But then I suppose for the first tournament, who's your target audience going to be? Is it the people who can actually get out of their front door and line the streets?
It's just, you think with the push to promote women's sport at the moment that there would have been more coverage of it down here, but early days. Very early days.
First edition of it, and it obviously could have gone a lot better, but it could have been a lot worse.
You can't help the weather though, can you?
You can't help the weather, and it was a yellow weather warning all that week. I mean, no one could have foreseen that when they initially came up with the idea and the dates. So, next year, try again. That's it then for this news roundup section. Our discussion topic on Rugby World Cup in England, comes after this very short break. Follow SportSpiel Pod on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram, or go to our website sportspielonline.com. If you hadn't noticed, we have another World Cup coming up, namely the Rugby World Cup in Japan, which starts on September the 20th and comes to a close on November the 2nd. Yet England and Eddie Jones have already announced their World Cup squad with some notable absentees, particularly the missing Ben Teo. The two big surprises, that will probably be Lewis Ludlam and Bathwing Ruaridh McConaughey being called up. We record this a day after Wales beat England 13-6 in a warm-up game, although this time last week England were beating Wales. So what are we making of the squad at this stage? Bearing in mind, if Eddie Jones had wanted to, he still has a fair few weeks to actually put plans in place and see who he wants as part of his team and not.
I think the general consensus is that this isn't the squad that will go to Japan. I think he's expecting a couple of injuries, and then we'll see some other players called back in. But it feels slightly unlike an Eddie Jones team in that he's plumped for a relatively inexperienced squad for the biggest tournament of them all. I think there are only 8 players with 50-plus caps, which is, that is a young squad. But you look at the two sort of, or the 3 names, and Lewis Ludlam looks ready-made for international rugby. I think he's impressed. Rory McConaughey, okay, we haven't seen him yet in a 15 shirt for England, but we all know, or those of us who watched Rio and watched the 2018 Commonwealth Games know what he brings in the 7s game, so that's really exciting to know that he can offer that in the 15s. And Willie Hines, I mean, whatever your thoughts on whether he should be playing for England or not, due to selection and international laws and stuff like that. He only qualifies because he's been here for 4 years and he's got an English grandmother. It's a slightly contentious link to England, but he's a very good scrum half and will provide an able backup to Ben Youngs. But you mentioned there Ben Teo, and he's the obvious name that's been left out. But if you think of some of the other names that haven't made it, Dylan Hartley, Mike Brown, Chris Robshaw, Nathan Hughes, Danny Kerr, Danny Cipriani, Brad Shields. Some of his old favourites in there have been cast by the wayside. I mean, up until recently, Hartley and Robshaw were first choice, and now they're not even getting in the squad, and they're back from injury. So and Mike Brown as well. Like, what's he really done wrong to deserve being dropped? I know, obviously, with Johnny May and Jack Knoll and Elliot Daly sort of forming the regular back three, and Anthony Watson coming back, it's difficult for him to get in. But surely you would take someone of his experience to be in and around the squad than someone who's only had really half a good season like McConaughey in the 15s game.
Like you say, that's as he knocks his computer over on the table, that was that bang. Like I say, that's the two previous captains out of the squad thus far in Robshaw and Hartley. But specifically talking about Ben Teo and Mike Brown and the inverted commas altercation they had during a team bonding session, how much do we actually read into that and their absence, or is it a convenient excuse as to why they're not there?
It's interesting that it's been leaked, and I think the story goes that Ben Teo was the aggressor and Mike Brown was on the receiving end. Whether Mike Brown provoked him or not, well, I guess we'll never know. But yeah, I don't really understand it, to be honest. I guess
doesn't an altercation like that, do you run the risk of having bad blood in your camp early doors if you've got either one or both of them in your squad? And is it the atmosphere, sort of Eddie Jones and the camaraderie? Is that what he's trying to build at this early stage? And maybe part of the reason why he's, even if it might change, why he's sort of named the squad so early. Well,
he said he wanted to name his squad early so they had a chance to get to know each other and get to build relationships on and off the pitch, and give them the longest time possible in which to do that. But a lot of these players have been playing together for years anyway, so you wouldn't necessarily think they would need as much of that as he's given them. Ben Teo, it sounds like he's in a difficult place because he's gone from being first choice, being picked when he was barely recovered from injury, to being dumped. And whether this was part of it or whether this was a frustrated reaction from him knowing that his place was on the line and someone's wound him up, it could be either or, really.
I can see the reasoning based on what's happened. Side point, is that Ben Teo's England career over? Because I think the rumours are he's going to Japan to sign for a new club.
He's a free agent at the moment because Worcester let him go after their poor season this season, and the rumour is he's going to be signing for a team in Japan. So whether he does that now anyway and get some game time out there, and maybe if there's an injury then he can come into the squad, who knows. But yes, I think this would have been his swan song, and he's not been given that opportunity necessarily.
Brief mention for no Brad Shields as well. I know he's got a foot injury, but that was another absentee that people were kind of questioning about how much of a part does that injury actually play, or if you'd waited a little bit longer, could you have incorporated him to the squad?
If this was an isolated case, you could say it was because of the injury, but the fact is he's picked Jack Knoll, who is struggling with injury and may not be fit for the first game, and yet he hasn't picked Brad Shields. So I think it's a case of he didn't bring Brad Shields over. Brad Shields came over from New Zealand to play for Wasps, but he's never really turned in the performances that he was so highly talked for in New Zealand. For Wasps, he's had sort of the odd game where he's been really impressive, but for every time I've seen him for England, he's never been as good as the hype has been suggested about him. So I think the injury was part of it, but I also just don't think Eddie Jones fancied him anymore.
To kind of getting an overarching view on how the squad is at the moment, bearing in mind the game yesterday, are there notable weaknesses or improvements that need to be made almost urgently? Because, time time is of the essence now. We're in sort of the home run stretch. But based on what we saw yesterday, perhaps, are there any glaring problems for you?
I haven't actually seen most of yesterday's game. I've only seen bits of. But what really worries me with this England team is the lack of experience. There are a lot of players who are established in this team but haven't really been to a World Cup before, or have barely experienced the World Cup. So you're looking to the likes of Johnny May, Maro Itoje. I can't remember off the top of my head if both of them went to the last World Cup, but potentially if they haven't, and they're some of your senior players, and things are going wrong for you at the World Cup, you need as many players who know how to get out of that situation as possible. And with so many players with so few caps have only been in the international setup for a year, my only worry is if things start to go wrong and England need to draw on some reserves, those reserves aren't there because they're Danny Kerr, they're Chris Robshaw, they're Mike Brown, they're Dylan Hartley, and they've been left at home. That's my only worry. But I look at this team, I look at the backs especially, so excited by the back line. You think Anthony Watson is coming back, Elliot Daly, Jack Knoll, Johnny May, McConaughey as well. Those five. I've probably missed someone out of there as well, but that's an exceptional back line. You look at the back row options as well. Ludlam looks like a really good player. I'm a massive fan of Mark Wilson as well. So it's an exciting time. I just worry that if things start to go wrong, then it's going to be another embarrassment.
I think maybe this is like a typical British opinion, really, where you can see the potential there, a lot of potential, and a lot of talent on show. But I suppose it's a case of timing, because the World Cup is here and now. It's next month it starts, and it's the lack of experience side of things that I think we're maybe all worrying about. I think we can all agree it's a talented squad and maybe 2 years down the line, this would be a great squad to have. But I think it's maybe the venturing into the unknown at the moment, which is kind of where we're at as onlookers.
But I could see this England side winning the World Cup. I don't doubt that.
As well as bombing out.
This isn't in the. I feel like how I felt before the Cricket World Cup. This is an England side that could quite easily win the tournament and could quite easily be very heavily embarrassed.
Either or situation is how we do things. To touch on briefly on the other home nations as well, and I'll mention Wales because they won yesterday, and that means they're going to go top of the world rankings. And since we mentioned potentially winners of the World Cup, are they, as Eddie Jones says, now the World Cup favourites? Or is that just mind games, as they say?
It's massive mind games from Eddie Jones, and he loves them, doesn't he? I don't think you can look past New Zealand as favourites, to be honest.
That's what I've written down.
As Australia have proven, and as a couple of teams have proven in the last couple of years, this New Zealand side is fallible. They're not the all-conquering side of 4 years ago. This is a team that can be beaten. And I think this could be one of the closest, most evenly fought World Cups for a while, because you think top 5, top 6, any of them could win. Wales could win, New Zealand could win, Australia could win, England could win. Ireland, no one's talking about them anymore because they slightly flopped at the Six Nations this year, but they were deemed favourites this time last year. And then you look at South Africa, they've come from nowhere. 2 years ago, they were shocking. They were terrible. But they've had a massive renaissance in their country, and some of the players they've got coming through now, they could win. So I think it's going to be a brilliant competition, but you can't look past New Zealand, really, can you?
So they're your winners, I take it?
Yeah.
They are also mine. Playing safe. You touched on Ireland there, and likewise, this time last year, they were in formidable form, and there was just glowing reviews of them left, right and centre. It's gone a little bit haywire since, but again, the depth of talent and the amount of potential that team has, definitely in the running.
I think they might enjoy the fact that the pressure's come off them in the last few months and no one's really talking about them. I think they tend to perform better when they're like that, and they have, as do England, a mix of real experience and exciting youth. Don't see why they can't win it.
And then to bring it full circle, Scotland. I say this with Scottish family and a number of university Scottish friends who like their rugby. And yesterday's game, where they lost 32-3 to France. And in the words of BBC Scotland chief sports reporter Tom English, he said, "It's pretty worrying stuff, and it's the continuation of a trend."
They've had a bad year. for a side that did so well 4 years ago to be robbed of a place. I think it was in the semi-finals, wasn't it?
It was.
They should have beaten Australia, but one poor refereeing decision
Joubert.
robbed them of that. But they've got some serious talent, but they've had so many bad injuries this year. That's why they did so bad at the Six Nations, because they had a bunch of like 10, 12 players of their best players all out injured, and I think their players are starting to come back, but they're not gelling at the moment. I think we saw that yesterday in the France game. Again, France could spring a surprise and win the tournament as well, but I think Scotland will do okay. I think they'll do better than people are expecting them to do at the moment, but I can't really see them pushing for the top 4 like they were last time.
Right, I'll close this off then with some predictions, and considering how well our Women's World Cup predictions went, let's do this again. Winners, I think we said, New Zealand. Runners up.
How rogue can I go?
Well, you've got previous.
South Africa.
Ooh. Nah, Australia. I'm not feeling rogue.
I was thinking Australia, but South Africa I think could spring some surprises.
Okay, final question. Where will England finish?
Top 4. I think they'll get to the semis.
Out in the pool.
You're going for the heavy embarrassment, are you?
I am. I don't know if it's just the memories of 4 years ago like scarred my brain, but
And the 4 years before that.
that as well. But yes, I don't know. I'm being too English, and if I get my hopes up, I know they'll end in tears.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes. And on that positive note, we'll draw the discussion section to an end, and it's my favourite part of the show, next. In terms of questions, it's time for the questions to be turned on my good self on the latest round of Ask Alasdair, a game that I've been so successful at. I'm currently on a score of 0.5.
At least you're not on minus points. Last time you did get a tough question last time, which was Finland being the only country to claim the gold, silver and bronze medal at the same Olympics in the men's javelin. The question we put to the audience: what year was Hawkeye first used at Wimbledon? Well done to everyone who correctly identified 2007 as being the year. I thought it had been in action for slightly longer than that, but I think you thought slightly less, didn't you?
Can't even remember what I said.
I think you said 2013.
Did I?
Yeah. Anyway,
No, I would have been wrong again.
This week, your choices are Wimbledon again or London 2012.
Annoyingly, he said to me before we started recording that I will get one of these right, provided I pick the right one. London 2012.
Well, you've gone for the one I think you'll get right. After winning heptathlon gold at London 2012, what did the now Dame Jess Ennis-Hill have named after her?
The stand, Sheffield United.
You can say it a bit louder if you want.
One of the stands at Sheffield United.
Correct. 1.5 points that moves you on to.
Wow, dizzying heights.
I thought it was quite a nice question.
Thank you. No, I actually got it right. So.
And the Wimbledon question we will be putting out to the audience: how many times did Pete Sampras win the Wimbledon men's singles title? Wasn't as many as I thought, actually.
I got it wrong.
So good luck with that, and congratulations, Alasdair. I'm going to have to find a harder question next time.
Please don't. Some final messages after this very quick break. Right, that is almost it for episode 40 of the podcast. Some final messages. I say final messages, quite big messages actually. The podcast will soon be changing, having a revamp and a relaunch and all that sort of stuff. Henceforth, the regular podcast will be an interview-only show, and our discussions will be their own separate podcast entity. Still be on the same channel, so you don't have to suddenly subscribe to a new channel or anything, but we'll be separating it out. So we'll have interview-only podcasts and discussion-only podcasts going forwards. We're also going to be redoing the website, partly because it's getting a makeover, and we're going to be having a lot more features and articles on there as well. because we've got some new partners and new people who want to get involved. So
And we have a new exciting project
yes. So
that I have come up with, and it's a crazy idea, but we're going to do it.
It's a crazy idea. We'll see how it goes. We've got a few months to put it in place. But yeah, essentially it's all changing, but we hope for the better.
And we're not changing. We're still here.
No, we'll still be lurking around in the corners, as ever. But yes, we'll be rebranding, and all that will be revealed on social media and all that sort of stuff very soon. In terms of our return date for the new improved SportSpiel, loosely, we're thinking 15th of September, which is a Sunday, if memory serves me right, for our comeback. So between now and then, the website will totally change. This is going to totally change. But
Will you grow a
exciting
beard?
things. That will not change. Still waiting for anything hair-wise to happen on my face. But that's it for today, unless there's anything else you want to add.
Nope.
He's shaking his head saying no.
I'm all done.
And with that,
Let's
listeners,
go back to work now.
Enjoy the week.
Whoa.
Enjoy what remains of the lack of sunshine. And we will see you, and you will hear from us very, very soon. Bye-bye for now.